Jesus' precious name, amen. So today's message is mercy and grace. Hebrews chapter 4, verse 16 tells us, "Let us therefore come boldly unto the throne of grace, that we may obtain mercy and find grace to help in time of need." You know, sometimes I get up here and I have a verse that's I pull up for the first one to look at, and the verse says it so well, I feel like, what else do I need to say? Let's just close up the Bible and go home. Because some of these verses just speak so loud on their own. And this is one of those verses that speaks incredibly loud. But I'd be doing a disservice if I just left it there, because here's the thing about mercy and grace. The Bible has a lot to say about it. A lot to say about it. And so to just look at one verse would be a disservice to the topic. So what is this supposed to look like? You know, Jesus told us the perfect example of what this is to look like in our lives, not just from God's perspective. Luke chapter 18, verse 13 says, "And the publican, standing afar off, would not lift up so much as his eyes unto heaven, but smote upon his breast, saying, God, be merciful to me, a sinner." Here he was. He knew what he was. You know, I'll say this periodically, and it's a great point. The people who are the easiest to reach in this world are the ones who are steeped heavy in sin. Because they know what they are, just like this publican did. He knew he was a filthy, dirty, rotten sinner. And so because he knew he was steeped in sin, he came to the equivalent of church and he bowed his head. "Forgive me for what I've done. Forgive me because I'm a sinner." Contrast that to the hardest people to reach for Christ. The hardest people to reach for Christ are the ones who've lived a really good moral life, who have things going well. Well, I've never lied, I've never stole, I've never cheated, I've never committed adultery, I've never done these things. I'm doing pretty good. I'm not a sinner. One of the great lies people today think is, oh, I'm not a sinner. And I say today, it's always been that way. Those are the hardest people to reach because, oh, I've never committed murder. I've never gone and robbed a store. See, I'm a good person. Those are the hardest people to reach because they don't understand what they are. The Bible tells us all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. And the thing about sin, God doesn't look at it the way we look at it. See, we look at it in terms of criminality. How criminal was the sin? And yeah, we have sins that are small and sins that are big in criminality. But God doesn't care about criminality. He cares about morality. And so God's up there in heaven looking at the sin of the horrible sinner who knows what he's doing and feels guilty about it, and it's easier to shed mercy and grace and get through to him than the person who doesn't even realize they've committed a sin in the first place. Because you have to convince the person that they've done something wrong. But when we come to the place where we realize what we are, this is what we're supposed to do. Bow our eyes and say, Lord, have mercy on me, a sinner. See, one of the things that I'll frequently say also is that Christianity is a religion built on humility. You cannot be a faithful Christian to God. You can't even come to Christ if you have pride in your heart. Because here's the thing, you're not good enough. You're not. You're not worthy of any of it. And when we realize that, all we can do is beg for mercy and grace. But you know, a lot of churches will teach on this subject. Lots of churches love to preach on mercy and grace. But they do something that does a disservice to it. Because here's the thing, if you don't understand what you need mercy from and what grace is providing to you, that mercy and grace becomes hollow. It becomes not that big of a deal. Because in order to understand mercy and grace, we also have to understand God's justice and his wrath. And that's where we're going to start. So the first thing we need to understand is mercy versus justice from God. Because when we have God's mercy and his justice, these are the declarations of his judgment. Am I going to give you judgment or mercy? It's a choice that he makes. Now, it's not just an arbitrary choice. He has conditions for it. And we'll get to those more later. But we need to understand what this is when we're looking at God's justice versus his mercy, justice demands and says, you deserve punishment. And mercy says, I'm not going to give you that which you deserve. You know, if a man's innocent and goes before a court and he's innocent, is it, and the court's perfectly just, is it mercy for him to be declared innocent? No, that's not mercy. And released, because he was innocent. But if a man's guilty and is declared guilty because the court's perfectly just, but is then set free, that's mercy. Because he was declared guilty and needed punishment, but the decision said, even though you're guilty, I'm going to set you free. That's what we're talking about when we're talking about mercy versus justice. And then, when we look at grace versus wrath, that is the application of that. That is the actual action. God's wrath is his execution of the punishment. So when we talk about God's wrath, we're talking about hell that's going to burn eternally. But his grace is giving us that which we don't deserve, giving that which we didn't ask for, giving us more than we deserve. See, God's wrath is giving us that which is deserved. Not the decision, but the application of actually doing it. And God's grace is therefore him giving things to us that we don't deserve. And so I wanted to set that framework in front. So as we look at the scripture, we can have this framework to help shape us and understand what we're dealing with. Because it's critical that we understand this relationship to understand God's teaching on this properly. And so we're going to start with a few verses on judgment. Deuteronomy chapter 32, verse 4. He is the rock, and his work is perfect, for all his ways are judgment. For a God of truth and without iniquity, just and right is he. See, he's perfectly just. His ways are true. His ways are just and right. And when he declares his judgment, it's not some arbitrary thing. He has set down standards that he is going to keep and make sure are maintained at all times. Romans 3:20, therefore by the deeds of the law there shall no flesh be justified in his sight, for by the law is the knowledge of sin. See, when we see the law, when we see God's word laid out in front of us, the Ten Commandments and all of that, what that does, the reason he gave it to us, is it exposes the sin. The sin that's in our heart, the sin that's in our life, and there's no one who's going to be justified innocent by the law. We're all going to be, the judgment is all going to be guilty because of the law. The law is what gives us the guidelines on what makes it spelled out what guilt is. James 2:13, for he shall have judgment without mercy, and hath shown no mercy, and mercy rejoiceth against judgment. See, God understands something. He has to make a guilty verdict for all sin. Because he's truth. Because there is no sin that is ever justified in our actions. There's no sin that is ever a good thing that we can do. And so every sin is going to come under judgment of God. By his own count. He is the same yesterday, today, and forever. He cannot change. And so he is going to judge every single sin. And then with that, he's going to pour his wrath out on them. Romans 1:18, for the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men who hold the truth in unrighteousness. Habakkuk 1:13, thou art purer eyes than to behold evil, and cast not look on iniquity. Wherefore lookest thou upon them that deal treacherously, and holdest thy tongue when the wicked devour the man that is more righteous than he? You cannot look on iniquity. Hebrews 12:29, for our God is a consuming fire. You see, folks, God is love. We love that verse. That's such a sweet verse. God is wrath. It is equally correct to say God is wrath as it is to say God is love, as it is to say God is merciful and gracious. God is a God of judgment and wrath. And he's going to pour his wrath out eternally on those who are deemed condemned in judgment. Because his character can't do that. Why is that? It's because he is holy. Isaiah 6:3. One cried unto another and said, holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. The whole earth is full of his glory. What we need to know about his holiness is the accumulation of all his perfectly, fully applied, pure and sinless characteristics. It's the standard of perfection. It's not even that we say he's the best. He's the one who creates the measurement in the first place. It's like big. The universe is big. Well, he's the one who created big. And the same thing's true with his holiness. His holiness is so pure because it takes all of these things together and brings it into the place to understand that we have a God who is going to make sure there's not one sin ever committed, ever, that's going to go unpunished. Not one. Think about that for a second, folks. That means a couple days ago when you told that little white lie, that sin's going to be punished. And God's going to pour his wrath out on that sin. That means a few days ago when you had that naughty thought pop into your head that you entertained and you thought about, or you let your mouth run a little bit where you shouldn't have. That sin is going to be punished eternally. Because God's character demands it must be so. And there's a lot of reasons why for that beyond the scope of this sermon. But God demands every sin be punished. So if that's the case, what hope do we have? Well, because here's the thing, God isn't just wrath and judgment. But we need to understand God's wrath and judgment to appreciate His mercy and His grace. Because if we don't understand what that is affecting, where it comes from, then that mercy and grace is hollow and shallow. We need to understand the depths of how bad these things are. You say, well, I only told a little white lie. That's not a big deal. Do you realize that little white lie, if that was the only sin that in existence, that would still be enough to require eternity in hell? Or, as we're going to see, Christ's death on the cross. That's what we're talking about. That's the level of depth we're dealing with here. And so we look at that, we take that, and we get to now look and see God in your judgment that is perfect. And there's no lies. You judge perfectly. And then you pour out your wrath and execute that judgment perfectly. How can we beg for mercy, me a sinner? But that's exactly what we do, because God doesn't stop there. God wants to be merciful. Isaiah chapter 55, verses 6 and 7. Seek ye the Lord while he may be found. Call ye upon him while he is near. Let the wicked forsake his way, and the righteous man his thoughts, and let him return unto the Lord, and he will have mercy upon him and to our God, for he will abundantly pardon. Did you catch the first part? I found the first part interesting. Verse 5. Seek ye the Lord while he may be found. Do you realize there's a time clock? The first thing we got to understand, and right here in this verse, there's a time clock. There's a point where God's not going to be found anymore. Not because God's hiding, but because the window's going to close. The simple answer to that, that's when we die. When we die, that time clock's over. If you haven't called upon the Lord for mercy by that point, mercy's not going to be found. God's going to come into it. It's like bring into kind of a modern setting. It's like here you have a day at the police department where it says you've committed a crime. If you come turn yourself in and reveal this and turn yourself in, we'll drop the charges. Today only. But if you don't do it by tomorrow, we're going to come find you, and then you're going to get prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. Now, what kind of deal would that be? Obviously, that makes it great, but that's exactly what God's done. That's what God has done, has made that deal. If you do it before you die, I'll show you that mercy in abundance. But that day is closing. Micah 7:18. Who is a God like unto thee, that pardoneth iniquity, and passeth by the transgression of the remnant of his heritage? He retaineth not his anger forever, because he delighteth in mercy. See, he loves being able to show you mercy. He actually likes it. Not because he's glad you did something wrong. Don't misunderstand. He doesn't like that you did something wrong, but he loves being able to have a relationship with you where he can forgive you and restore you and bring you back to the fold. See, he wants to show you that mercy. He wants to be a part of your life. He wants you to get on the right track because he knows what's coming if you don't. And that's the God we serve. He is so merciful to us that he wants to, the word is, I believe the word's oppugnate his judgment, to flip it and say, no, I'm not going to give you that which you deserve. I'm going to give you that, show you mercy and not make you have that. What a wonderful thing that is. Let's look at Romans chapter 9, verses 15 and 16. For he saith to Moses, I will have mercy on whom I will have mercy, and I will have compassion on whom I will have compassion. So then it is not of him that willeth, nor of him that runneth, but of God that showeth mercy. See, folks, we need to understand, and this verse helps us highlight this. When the misconceptions about this passage I just shared with you is that this is talking about God's influence in our life. It's not. It's talking about God's judgment in our life. God says, I will judge one way or the other who I will judge one way or the other based upon the criteria I have given. It's not about the influence in your life. It's about God making a judgment in your life. It brings this verse into a new criteria when we understand it in this proper context. God is saying talks about Moses, he referencing back to Pharaoh and all of that. Look, there are people there who I influence, yes. But the judgment I give is who I'm going to give it to based on the criteria. And we'll get to the criteria here in a minute. We're coming to that. But I have a criteria I use, and I'm going to give that to whom I give it to. I'm going to give that criteria to whom I choose to, not because of them, but because of me and who I am. I get to show mercy, and I give it to whoever meets the criteria I provide for it. That's my ability. I have the right to do that as God, is what he's saying. And again, this isn't the influence of saying, oh, God, some Christians try to take this to say, well, God's choosing who gets saved. No, that's not what he's saying at all. He's saying this is the decision I make for those who get saved. I'm making a decision to show mercy to them and not show judgment to them. And that's an important thing for us to look at with this. Titus chapter 2, verse 11 and 12, as we go into grace now. For the grace of God that bringeth salvation hath appeared to all men, teaching us that denying ungodliness and worldly lust, we should live soberly, righteously, and godly in this present world. For the grace of God. Now we're talking about his influence. Now we're talking about God giving us that which we don't deserve. Before, mercy was not giving us what we do deserve. The grace of God is now giving us what we don't deserve, which is salvation. See, here's the thing. If we just theoretically, you had somebody who never sinned, do they deserve judgment of hell? No, the answer would be no. But do they deserve heaven? The answer is no, they don't deserve heaven. They haven't done anything to earn that extra place. All they've done is that which they were supposed to do. And the Bible actually has a passage that talks about that. Jesus Christ himself said, if somebody were to go and live this life perfectly, I'm paraphrasing, and never sin, they still are unprofitable to God because they only did that which they were supposed to do. See, that's no judgment or wrath or mercy or grace. That's the middle line in between. But God, when he sheds his mercy on us, also sheds his grace on us. He influences us. And he makes a promise here that every single person, I'm going to pour out grace that I don't have to. God has no obligation to provide grace, by the way. This is purely at his loving desire for us. But he says, I'm going to give every single person enough grace, enough of my support that they could get saved. Do you realize there's a lot of arguments out there against God that says, well, what about the people who've never heard about the Bible and don't know anything about God? The Bible says, no. I gave them enough grace that they could have known me. There are stories of missionaries who crash landed on islands due to their plane failing or their ship being crashed, and then witnessing to the islanders and seeing people saved. That's what happened to Paul, by the way. He got shipwrecked a couple different times. Why? So he could be a witness to the people on those islands. See, God's going to make sure somebody shows up if they're ready, if they're responding to the grace. So God's given you enough grace to respond to him. So here's a question. Have you been responding to his grace? Have you received that grace and actually turned towards it? Because here's the thing. You get to decide. You get to have the choice, just like every single person. Am I going to respond correctly to that grace, or am I going to push it away? Because here's the thing. God doesn't promise a lot. He promises enough. He promises enough. But here's the thing. God, in his merciful gracefulness, he wants you to. And so if you start responding correct, he's going to keep growing it and giving you more and more so that you can come to know him. And that's the God we serve. Romans 6:14, for sin shall not have dominion over you, for ye are not under the law, but under grace. Here's an important passage here. See, we oftentimes get caught up in the legality of what's technically a sin. Well, if I do it like this, it's a sin, but if I do it just like this, it's not a sin. If I can just stay this, I don't like, because we want to get this technical legal mindset, like lawyers, how they pick apart the law. Well, we used a question mark instead of a period, therefore it went from legal to from illegal to legal by changing that question mark to a period. Oh, just by that one thing, it went, and it's like, no, you were doing wrong because you knew what you were doing. See, God doesn't measure the technical legalese of it. He measures the heart. He's looking at your heart to measure it. And that's what it means. And God is under the grace. The grace of saying, you don't have to do these laws. That's gracious of him. Because back in the Old Testament, we had to do the laws. We had all these rules he wanted us to follow. He said, no, I'm going to be gracious and wipe that away. You don't have to do these laws anymore. And that's gracious of him. But, like I've said before, that actually gives us a higher standard and a higher burden that we bear, because now we can't hide behind the law and say, well, God, I did all the sacrifices like you told me to. No, now we have to stand before the Lord bare and say, Lord, did I actually serve you the way I was supposed to? See, we don't have it easier under grace. We actually have it harder because now we have to be more honest about what we're doing. We have to be more humble in our lives under grace. But that's exactly what he wanted. But it is gracious of him to give us that. Because it goes on to say in Romans 11:6, and if it be by grace, then it is no more of works. Otherwise, grace is no more grace. But if it be of works, then it is no more grace. Otherwise, work is no more work. Kind of an interesting statement there, but to unravel it, all he's saying is, look, you don't work for your salvation. Because if you work for your salvation, it wouldn't be mercy and grace that gives it to you. See, grace is the gift of God. Salvation is the gift of God. And if you get to do anything to earn it, then it's not grace and a gift anymore. It's now a payment. Which I always challenge the folks who want to say you have to do something to get to heaven. It's like, how could you do something where the payment, that what you should be paid, is heaven? That's like saying, well, I'm going to go down here to Winco and I'm going to beg groceries and I expect them to pay me $10 million to beg some groceries for somebody. Does that even make sense? No, of course not. But that's like when we try to say, well, God, I'm going to do this and I'm going to do this, and Lord, you should give me heaven for it. It's like, you want eternal rewards for that little bit of work you did? I don't think so. No, God looks at me and goes, no, I'm not going to give it to you because you begged my groceries. Oh, you want $10 million? Going back to the Winco example. Oh, you want $10 million? I'm not going to give it to you because you begged the groceries or you stocked some shelves. I'm going to give you the $10 million because I have it and I want you to have it. All you have to do is ask for it. Just ask for it. That's grace. That's mercy. Because here's the thing. The guy who has the millions of dollars to give you is going to look and they go, I ain't going to pay you $10 million to beg my groceries. No, even the craziest billionaire out there would never do that. But he would certainly say, there are certainly billionaires out there who would look at you and go, oh, you want to? I'll give you $10 million, but I'm not going to pay you $10 million to do. I'll just give it to you. And that's God. Not necessarily the best of illustration, but you get the point that I'm trying to make. If it's because it's paid, it's not his grace. It's not his love. It's not his mercy. It's not his offering to you. And that's what we have to understand. God is just saying, here, just take what I have. I don't know, have you ever had a scenario where someone offered you something and said, no, I don't want to just take it. Let me do something for you for it. Many of us have had that. Well, here, I'll just give it this to you. And you go, no, I don't want you to give it to me. Why are we like that? But we are like that, aren't we? Romans chapter 5, verse 20 says, moreover, the law entered that the offense might abound, but where sin abounded, grace did much more abound. See, we sin, and it consumes our life. It does. It consumes us. We are all so weak when it comes to withstanding sin. Okay, we might not be weak withstanding the same sin as one another. Some of you, it might be seeking money for your lust. Some of you, it might be gambling. Some of you, it might be women. Some of you, it might be, you name it, drugs, whatever. We all have a different sin in our life. I've never said we're going to be equally sinful in the nature of it, but we're all equally sinful in the God says here, The law entered to reveal, it didn't create, it revealed how much those sins happen, how much we fail. The whole Bible, when it comes to the law, the Bible says, don't do this, don't do that. Oh, no, those are just rules that God made my heart. No, those are the things that God said to show you how much you get wrong. But where sin abounded, God's grace, His ability to pour out into us, to give us that which we don't deserve, abounded. Every one of us here is blessed beyond measure, beyond what we can even fathom, and well beyond what we deserve. Everybody here, I look out, every one of you here has clothes. You're fairly clean. You've been able to get a haircut. You've been able to do these basic. You are all able to travel here from your homes. All of you have a place to live. Now, some of you have a nicer place to live than others, sure, but all of you have a place to live. You realize, and again, this is a point I want to make, there's not one of you here who's not in the top 1% of humans who have ever lived in terms of wealth and material items. The poorest person in this room today is filthy rich compared to the whole of humanity. You realize that. Throughout history, most people live on years scraps, barely had anything. God is so gracious to us, and in the midst of our sin, why does He do that? To give us a taste of how good He is, so that we can understand what He's offering to us for salvation. That we can have some comprehension that God, He's so good that in our sin, in our this horrible, sinful state we live in, He's still this good to us. How good is He going to be when we're out of sin? If we turn our life to Him and go to heaven, how good is it going to be there? How much better is it going to be? It's going to be beyond our ability to comprehend. And that's why God gives us grace. Here's what He did, so that we come to the place where we beg for mercy, realizing it, and then God give us even more grace. Because He doesn't want to pour out His wrath. He doesn't want to declare judgment on us. He wants to give us mercy. He wants to give us His grace. But yet, He gives us the choice on whether or not we receive it. He gives us the choice to say yes or no. 2 Corinthians 5:21. For He hath made Him sin for us, He knows Him, that we might be made the righteousness of God. The whole reason grace exists was Christ did. Christ became our sin. See, I told you every sin has to be punished. So how then do we get to go to heaven if every sin is punished? Because Christ became our sin. He said, if you accept my mercy and my grace, I will take that from you and take it upon myself. That sin has to be punished. All do it. All do it. All take the punishment for the amazing thing about that is the only way to do that is that He wasn't guilty of it Himself. Which is why Christ had to be perfect. No other human being could ever be a sacrifice. Because he wants